Just randomly
Say,
pick
hey, maybe
three
we
or
should do
maybe
something.
we should. Maybe we do 3 or 4.
That, I
Maybe we
kind
look
of
at,
was.
I can look at the water, they have the water drainage.
Good afternoon. I'm Acting Chair Linda Plunkett, and I would like to call to order the November meeting of the Environmental Advisory Council of the Isle of Palms. I also want to acknowledge that the press and the public have been duly notified of the meeting in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. First item on our agenda is approval of our last month's meeting.
Did
Do I
any-
hear any comments, corrections, or, hey, Belvin? We're glad you're here.
I didn't see anything from my
Do you
standpoint,
wanna
so
make a
I'm prepared to bring a motion unless someone else saw something.
Nope, I think.
All right, I'll bring a motion to approve last meeting's minutes.
Okay.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Minutes from October 12th are accepted as written. I don't know, we have 2 presentations this afternoon. I don't think we have any citizens' comments. So I'll move on to item 4 on the agenda. We're so pleased to have 2 speakers with us today. And Charlene Johnson of Native Plants to the People will go first. And Chris Fisher of Fisher Recycling will follow her. If we're all technologically set,
Is that Debbie?
I turn it over to, is Debbie on
Deb
the
is
phone?
joining
Okay.
virtually.
Okay.
I'm just going to set her up here so she can see.
That's fancy. Great.
Portal in.
Thank you, thank you. Charlene, welcome, and we're anxious to hear what you have to tell us.
Well, thank you very much for having me here today. I've spoken with both Mary and Deb over the past few months about bringing some more information about native plants to the Isle of Palms and also potentially a demonstration garden so that people can see them growing here on the island and potentially get inspired to grow them in their own yards. So I'll just give a few slides just about why native plants are important in the context of wildlife. They can also be used for stormwater control, which both are issues of concern, from my opinion, in this area. And then I'll go on to present kind of stages for putting together a demonstration garden and potential talk topics that I could deliver to residents of the island in the spring. So this is one of my favorite native plants, mountain mint. It attracts over 40 species of pollinators to my yard. It's very easy maintenance. Sometimes gardening can be challenging, but when you grow anything in the mint family, it usually takes care of itself. So this is a fantastic summer pollinator plant with a giant swallowtail visiting. So as a gardener and as a professional ecologist, my goal and the goal of my business, Native Plants to the People, is to help gardeners support wildlife in their home landscapes. So there are multiple ways that they can do that. So one is by planting native plants and fighting against something called the insect apocalypse, which was the cover story of National Geographic a few years back. And I'll give a little bit more information about that as we go on. Also planting for birds. And other insect-eating wildlife. So birds eat fruit on plants, but larval insects, so the caterpillars, are also very key for feeding baby birds. You can't get adult birds without the babies being fed, and native plants feed those caterpillars. And also, more traditionally, what people think of in terms of gardening is planting for the pollinators, so our butterflies, our bees, and other insects. So in addition to just gardening and adding native plants to gardens to support our native wildlife, it's also important for the big picture to support land conservation and also habitat restoration. And that's because in order for butterflies like monarchs, birds that are migrating to continue having healthy populations, they need to be able to move from habitat area to habitat area. So habitat loss, okay.
Just a second. Deb, can you hit mute? And then if you want to say something, just unmute yourself. The background noise is picking up. Thank you. Sorry.
That's a puppy.
Thank you, Deb.
Cute as they are.
You got it? Yeah.
Sounds like the background noise
Sorry about
Sorry
that.
about
has
that.
disappeared. So one thing to consider is that in coastal South Carolina, we've had a lot of people moving to the area. As part of that comes conversion of natural habitat into human habitat, which often has, homes and driveways and roads and a lot of impervious surface in the place of the plants that used to be there. And I have a visual for that. So there's this wonderful website that's freely available online called Google Time-Lapse. You can look at satellite imagery from anywhere in the globe over time and see how things have changed. So this is nearby. I didn't actually put an image of Sullivan's Island here, but if I give a follow-up talk to the public, definitely will. But we've got Mount Pleasant, Daniel Island here, and this is in 1984. So notice that you see a lot of green. Going to move forward to 2020. And this is not that long of a period. I'll just go back and forth one more time. So 1984, I was around. I think all of us in this room almost were around. And during our lifetimes, we have seen that much conversion
It's
of habitat
incredible. Awful.
into human neighborhoods. So it is really an urgent call to start creating habitat in our yards to make sure that birds, pollinators, other wildlife species have a place to call home as we convert their home quite significantly. So, excuse me. As I promised, I was going to elaborate on the insect apocalypse. So I often use this little comic because it's quite effective at communicating the change, another change that we have seen during our lifetimes. So in 1998, I was going into the mountains of North Carolina with my family, and we would drive along the highway, and every gas station we stopped at, we would have to clean our windshield because it would be covered with insect carcasses. Now, that wasn't a fun thing, but these days you go that same route and you no longer have to clean your windshield. And what that is an indication of how many insects we have lost during that time. And insects, although we may have been raised not to love them, have a lot of important ecological functions that they play, including serving as food sources for things like birds. So I think I had one more point here. So we should care about this because, they're pollinators. So it's not just the European honeybees that have been brought over that are pollinating our food crops as well as all of our wild species of plants, but they provide natural pest control, and they're also food for lots of wildlife that are easier to love. So caterpillars, it's what's for dinner, and this is specifically for baby songbirds. So even seed-eating birds like chickadees, cardinals, you think of them eating from your bird feeder, but their offspring, as they're in the nest and growing very, very quickly, need to be fed caterpillars. And caterpillars can only eat, in many cases, native plants. Without those native plants, you have a food shortage for the babies, and there's actually been research to show you have lower nestling success in areas with lower native plant density. So, saving the birds is a call that many people can answer or want to do something about, and sadly, within the last 50 years, we've had about a 30% decrease in birds in North America. And this is on top of much larger losses before that. So we used to have passenger pigeons. Naturalists would describe how it would block out the sun with the flocks of birds flying overhead. Completely eliminated those. One of our most beautiful native birds, the Carolina parakeet, extinct. So this is all more recently than that we've lost an additional 30% of the birds in our continent. So one thing that we can do is plant native plants, grow those caterpillars, and feed the voracious appetites of baby birds. If you've ever watched a nest from your couch and seen how many times those parents are going back and forth and feeding their offspring, it is a hard job being a parent bird during that nestling stage. And Doug Tellamy, who is a professor at the University of Delaware, he's written some wonderful books about that connection between native plants and wildlife, and specifically birds. Had some graduate students that did a lot of work, and they had cameras set up observing nests, and documented that it takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to take one batch of baby birds to fledgling stage.
Wow.
So it's a tremendous quantity. And when we have plants like ligustrum or loropetalum or non-native azaleas, those are not producing any caterpillars. So the more of those we have in our yard and the less of the native plants we have in our yard, the harder we're making these birds work and the lower the populations of the birds will be over time. So the good news is that we can actually do a lot of good just by making sure that the trees in our yards are native, because the trees are the ones producing the most biomass. And many of our trees can support many species of butterflies and moths and their offspring. So oaks by themselves can support 534 species of Lepidoptera larvae. So that's just a fancy word for butterflies and moths. Willows, cherries and plums, blueberries and maples, all of those are also very effective caterpillar growers.
What about crepe myrtles? It's popular.
So crepe myrtles, non-native, it may support up to 3 species of caterpillars, if that.
It's just
So
it's a popular decorative.
it is extremely
tree,
popular.
yeah.
Unfortunately, most of our traditional Charleston landscaping plants originated in Asia. And one of the things that I talk about when I give a longer talk on this topic is that plants, because they're rooted in the ground and they can't move to defend themselves, basically are chemical factories, and they defend themselves through chemicals that the insects cannot eat. When you bring plants that have evolved in a different part of the world here, our insects cannot overcome those chemical defenses. So you need that coevolution of plants and insects that evolved in the same location to enable the insects to eat them.
What about magnolia?
So magnolia, even though it's native, it has a very thick waxy coating. So it's not a fantastic larval host plant.
Thank you. I'm just curious on those two species.
So it doesn't have to be a tree. There are lots of wildflowers that also serve as larval host plants, but just in comparison, they don't produce as much biomass. So you need a lot more of them to do as much good. So our best one, our best herbaceous native plant for caterpillars is goldenrods. And you'll often see those on the side of the road. So it always saddens me when I drive somewhere and there used to be a whole bunch of wild goldenrods on the side of the road, and ironweed, and sumac, and elderberry growing in the ditch on the side of the road. And a new development comes in, and they clear it all, and they just have empty lawn and areas that they now actively mow, using more resources and reducing the habitat value of that area. So I'm hoping that we can, as a community, change our aesthetic so that we can appreciate the value of our native plants and the wildlife that they support, and not always feel that we have to be tidy and have a monoculture lawn that is mowed on a monthly basis, and has a lot of effort put into it to make it less habitat valuable.
Pardon me.
So pollinator gardening, as I mentioned, is the most familiar aspect of native plant gardening. So we've got a lot of different pollinators. It's not just the butterflies and the bees, but there's syrphid flies, which actually their larvae eat aphids. So they're a friend, and their adults eat nectar. Wasps, there's a lot of solitary wasps that are actually quite lovely, who are also pest control. So they'll eat sometimes caterpillars, katydids, other things, and they provision their nests with those insects and function as pest control in that way. And then there's also some really beautiful beetles. So the Delta scarab beetle is one of my favorites that's a pollinator in our area. So in order to get the most pollinator diversity, support the most species, it's helpful to plant flowers that bloom all season long and that have different characteristics. So bees, for instance, there are long-tongued bees and there are short-tongued bees, and therefore they can access nectar from different flower resources. So we have dozens, if not hundreds, of different species of each of these groups present here that we need to support as we have been converting habitat into home landscapes. So for butterflies, as we know, with monarchs, you need milkweed. And pretty much every butterfly has a larval host plant. And if without that larval host plant, you lose the butterfly. So it's important that we offer those, as well as the plants that are pretty and have flowers and offer nectar. And you also need nesting habitat, shelter, water, just like any other organism. And there's this wonderful resource by the Xerces Society, which is a nonprofit organization that does research on invertebrates, basically insects. And they have a resource called Pollinator Plant Southeast Region that basically provides a list of plants that serve all the different pollinators across the full season. And it's available free online in PDF format. So these are just some pictures of plants that I would recommend for the demonstration garden that are good for sunny and dry habitats. So we've got blanket flower. This one blooms from June until frost, sometimes beyond, especially in a coastal community like this one, where you get the moderating effect of the ocean. Frog fruit. This one's probably growing many places and you just don't realize it. It's actually a low evergreen ground cover. It's in the verbena family, has tiny little white flowers. It blooms 6 to 12 months out of the year, depending on where it is, and is the larval host plant for 3 different butterfly species. So it is highly valuable, and can be planted as a turf substitute or a turf supplement. Then there's Dune sunflower. This one, I live on James Island, is actually growing in the median of Folly Road. And if it can live surrounded by concrete on either side in midsummer, it can live anywhere in the low country. So it is kind of crazy. It's an annual species. So it dies every winter, usually self-seeds, so you don't need to plant it again, because it produces flowers once again for about 6 months out of the year. You start off with a plant that's this big in March. It can be up to 8 feet wide by the end of the season. So it is a very effective, long-blooming pollinator species for bees as well as butterflies. Has nice glossy foliage. I love the flower as a blanket flower. The foliage isn't the most spectacular foliage out there. Dune sunflower's foliage is beautiful. It's shiny and green and deep green. So this is one that was blooming along roadsides not that long ago. Spotted bee balm, also known as horse mint. It's in the mint family, so it's another one of those that's like really easy to grow. And it blooms in late summer, early fall. Amazing pollinator diversity coming to this. Pretty much anything in the mint family makes a really good pollinator plant. It's also quite lovely. The challenge with some of these is the size of the plant varies greatly depending on the growing conditions. So I have seen very well-behaved horse mint that's about this tall. And I've also seen in a friend's yard horse mint get this tall.
You're talking about my yard.
It is not your yard, but also there. So it's one thing that you can do is called the Chelsea chop, which is named after the Chelsea Garden Show, which is a plant that is likely to get larger than you might optimally want it to be. Before it starts budding up, you can cut it in half. So for spotted bee balm, it might be in late June. You cut it in half, and then it will branch at those points and actually likely produce more flowers than it would otherwise. So there are ways to manage large-scale native plants for formal gardens or slightly formal gardens. But you can also just let them do your thing if you place them in an appropriate location and context. Oh, so one more native plant here. This is one of our native milkweeds. So this is butterfly milkweed, which is solid orange. It likes dry soil. I usually see it on roadsides in Francis Marion National Forest. It likes that part sun sort of condition. And I had a purple coneflower, but it looks like the purple coneflower is not coming up. But that would be another good one for the garden, and one that's familiar to a lot of people. So this is just general advice that I give to people who are thinking of starting their first ever garden. I don't necessarily have to go through this, but this is kind of the type of information that I would share. So why native plants matter, specific details about them, specific species that are recommended, and then how you go about creating a garden in your own home landscape. So in this context, I figured it would be more important to talk about the steps for putting together the demonstration garden, if you decide to go ahead with that. So there's site preparation, so removing the turf grass. That's likely to be the most challenging stage of all, because our grass loves to spread. I think we've got a lot of Bermuda grass out there. You need to remove all the roots or it'll just keep spreading. And the better job you do up front at complete removal of the turf grass, the much lower maintenance it is for the rest of the lifetime of the garden. So it's really worth doing that upfront work. After that, installing edging, and then amending the soil. So it's a little bit easier. You don't need to water as frequently. So if you put compost in the soil, you mix that in, there's more organic matter, plants will be healthier, it will hold moisture better. And along those lines as well, pine straw, which will be held in by the edging, will help moderate the soil temperature. So the sun's going to be baking on this site. It's full sun all day long. And so it basically holds the soil moisture in, prevents evaporation as quickly, and prevents the soil temperature from getting too high during the day and too low at night. So it really moderates it. A lot of insects can live in the pine straw. It's gradually going to break down, add more organic matter to the soil, and also prevent weeding, or prevent the need for weeding. If you have a nice thick layer, it'll perform a lot of services for you. So after preparing the site, selecting the plants, this could happen at any stage, but I recommend a combination of regionally native wildflowers, both annuals and perennials, and that's because although perennials are wonderful in that they're lower maintenance, you don't need to plant them again in the spring, the annuals like the blanket flower and the Dune sunflower offer a much longer blooming season than any of our perennials. So for that reason, they're quite valuable. And through my business, one of the things that I try to do is make native gardening very affordable. So I sell blanket flower plugs for $3 each. And that blanket flower plug will be a plant this size, full of hundreds of blooms. So it's not a big investment the following spring. The Dune sunflower grows so quickly, you can't sell that as a plug. It will outgrow its plug tray almost immediately, so those come in slightly larger pots and $9. So it's pretty small cost of replanting the annuals, with continuing to have the matrix of the perennials there for year after year. Native grasses are wonderful. They provide structure. Even when they turn kind of golden brown for the winter, it's a nice winter shape. And they also serve as larval host plants for several skipper species, which are small butterflies, and provide a seed source for adult birds to eat.
Can you just give a couple of examples of native grasses for this area?
So one of my favorites is little bluestem, and another one is split-beard bluestem.
Okay.
And there's quite a few others,
Sure.
but those are two of my favorites for decorative
And
gardens.
sweetgrass would be one, too.
Sweetgrass as well, or pink muhly grass, yes.
Thank you.
So all three of those look great in masses, and then you can have the flowers kind of poking up in between those for the color and the pollinator benefits. In addition, especially in the winter time, when all the flowers kind of die back, it's nice to have some structure that's evergreen and stiff. So it's like presenting that structure year-round. So there are two evergreen shrubs that I'm fond of using in garden settings. One is dwarf Yopon holly, which also provides useful flowers in March. Very popular with pollinators, not so visible to the human eye. In addition, there's dwarf Walter's viburnum, which is semi-evergreen but functionally truly evergreen here in the Isle of Palms. And that one has a slightly more upright structure than the dwarf Yopon holly, which is like, you don't even need to prune it. It just is naturally that kind of ball shape that you want. And it also has clusters of small white flowers that are very visible and attractive to humans in about February. Now, it blooms so early that there are typically not as many pollinators around. So the Yopon holly's flowers are more valuable to pollinators, but the dwarf Walter's viburnum are more visible and appreciated by humans. So it's kind of a nice mix of evergreen shrubs.
What kind of viburnum is that? Did you spell that?
Walter's.
Walters?
It's Viburnum obovatum is the scientific name.
Walters. Okay. Thank you.
So after planting, obviously watering. And after visiting the site, it's a little bit challenging because there's not a water hookup right there. It sounds like there may be a community member right across the street who would be willing to allow us to use his hose, and then we could basically haul water over in 5-gallon buckets, pour that into watering cans, and that would be enough to get things established.
And you're talking about the 7th Avenue Triangle, not
Right.
Carmen Bunch Park.
So I should have put that picture first. It'll be coming in
Because
the
we
next
went to
slide.
both of them. Yeah.
Just a quick sidebar for us. Could we get a water hookup there?
We probably could. I mean, if, we have done
Water
a lot of
department
our,
owns it, right?
water department owns it. We have done a lot of water just by wells. I assume that a well with a pump would be okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, would the idea be that it would only need it for a bit and then it would, or would it forever need irrigation?
It would not need consistent irrigation. So the plant selection for this project and for all projects that I try to do, using plants that are adapted to those conditions is my goal. When plants naturally grow, their above ground biomass is matched with their roots and they don't need any supplemental watering. But when you take something out of a pot that's been watered every day in a nursery and you put it in the ground, it does take a few months of transition time. And it's frequent watering up front, and then you're kind of weaning it off the watering over time. And then every
And
time
over
you-
time, though, being maybe a month or two?
So 2 months probably.
Yeah, so probably if it was 2 months, we probably would not, I mean, we might just try to borrow a hose.
Yeah. But if we were gonna.
If we're gonna be a permanent thing, we could do that if we needed to, I think.
And just for sustainability reasons, I encourage when you are in a dry, well-drained site, not to plant plants that need a lot of regular irrigation. So the only thing is, in addition to that first 2 to 3 months of establishment time for the first time, the new annuals that are replaced every spring would need a little supplemental watering. But those are very small, and like just a few watering cans worth would be enough. Twice a week at first, you wean it off to less frequent after that.
Okay.
Okay, then in terms of short-term maintenance, so we have this big effort up front. We're getting the garden ready for planting, we're planting the plants, we're watering. Then we just need that sustained effort to make sure that the garden stays looking tidy and something that we're all proud of and happy to have there. So it shouldn't be high maintenance at all. And this is because we'll have prepped the site well with removing the turf grass, so that won't be poking up through the mulch. And we will have a thick layer of pine straw, which will keep the sun-targeted or sun-triggered weed seeds from growing. So it will be minimal, but there's always some garden maintenance. Always some weeds will make their way through. So that combination of watering and weeding will be the short-term maintenance, and then longer term is just weeding, cutting back plants in the winter after that first frost. So all of the wildflowers are basically going to die back at that point. And while there's some wildlife value in leaving them upright, since it is a public garden in a public place, I think it's more likely that the majority would wish to cut them back. One thing that you can do, we would leave the grasses upright because that will provide habitat value, the seeds for the birds, and some structure and beauty, but probably the wildflowers we could cut back. You can cut them back and then just let them drop on the surface, and then all of the habitat value to insects and birds stays there. If you want an even cleaner look, you can move that away and compost it somewhere. And then every spring, replanting some annuals. In some cases, these in nature, the native annuals reseed themselves. But we are adding that thick layer of mulch in order to solve a weeding problem for us. However, just like it prevents the weed seeds from germinating, it also does a pretty good job of preventing the native annuals from germinating. So probably have to add those back in. And then pine straw, as it breaks down, which is providing a service of adding organic matter to the soil, you just need to supplement that to make sure you continue to have that thick layer and the weed management over time. So that is, oh, this is the picture I probably should have showed before all of this. So we've got Palm Boulevard here, we've got 7th Avenue, and it's this little triangular open area that the proposed area is. There's a palm tree, you can see its shadow as well as the tree itself. And there's a beautiful piece of driftwood there that we would definitely create as a focal point for the garden. There's also a trumpet vine that's a native vine that's growing on the driftwood, so definitely would leave that untouched.
If that piece of driftwood falls off, we might have to put something else up for the trumpet vine to grow on, because it's a good native vine.
Yep, so there are trellis options. Some of them are more cost-effective and less attractive, and some of them are more expensive and almost sculptural.
Are we talking the whole triangle or just a piece of it?
Just around.
Just a piece of it.
Just around the tree.
So the garden would probably be that size or a little bit smaller.
And I assume the water company will continue to mow the grass that's there around it?
Yep, I would think
They're
so. I
not
mean-
going to expect us to do that, are they?
No, I would think the expectation would be, if that blue circle was the ring of the garden, that they would do the remainder and they would leave inside the blue circle for us.
Yeah.
Was there a long-term
That
issue
would
with
be
this
perfect.
location?
Yes, I think so. I think they've kind of put us on notice that, you know, they're certainly agreeable for a couple of years. But I don't know that, especially if it kind of, you know, became unruly or we stopped maintaining it to a high degree, that they would expect it to be, revert back to just.
I live right there. I'll make sure it's kept nice.
Good. Where will in this diagram, where will the pump station be located?
I have talked to Park, and he has he's the guy who lives in that house on the.
Park is here.
Yeah. And he is interested, he has gotten their permission to put a purple martin pole probably on the lower right-hand corner somewhere down there near his house, to have martins there. And the water company originally told him that it might be at that corner, and
Yeah.
it would be huge. It would take up almost the whole area outside the blue circle. But then they said, well, we might not even put one there, and we could put it somewhere else. So that's the latest I
Yeah,
heard.
my impression is that their concept had it going in this kind of third of the triangle,
Yeah.
but that they hadn't, you know, that they were agreeable to, it could be, I think, anywhere in the triangle from a piping standpoint. I think they didn't want to put it right out on Palm Boulevard just for visibility. perspective, but that is, I think, they naturally just chose
Away from the
away from Palm
highway.
Boulevard as
Yeah.
their place.
That's a terrible.
I hate to even ask the question because I know you guys have moved so far along with this location, but the Carmen Bunch Park location, has that been explored about as an option more long-term or as like a second wave? I'm just thinking about people being able to stop more and enjoy it. I mean, people bike and golf cart by there, going to the Harris Teeter and whatnot, and, there's park benches there. Whereas people, it seems like, are just going to drive by this morning. They might see it, but they might not stop to enjoy it.
Well, you
So-
want me to take that question?
I'm
or-
happy to speak
Okay.
after you.
Well, we went there too.
Yeah.
And it's a shady, it would be a whole different kind of plant to go there. And people have told me that this is more visible, and then other people have told me, well, Carmen Bunch would be more visible. It depends on if you come down this end of the island, I suppose. It's a toss-up, and Charlene even suggested that we start with this one and then put one there too.
Okay. That's
With
just
other
curious.
plants in it.
Yeah.
I still would love to see the rec department get some native plants.
They don't want to do it.
Oh, we talked to them and they,
What is it with this, I'm interested in they don't want to do it concept, I mean.
Well, I
we'll-
don't
we'll-
know.
We should make strong recommendations to the city council that we think they
Well, I
should do
don't-
this, that, and the other thing, if we think it's a good idea.
From my perspective, a crawl before you're
Oh, yeah,
sprinting
no,
all
no,
over
no.
the properties would be a good, so I think we choose the one we think is the best and and I do think that if you all said we absolutely think that the best place is the rec center, I don't know that they would have any great resistance to it if you thought it was far superior, but I think we just choose one site, whichever one.
a test
if
case.
one is,
yeah,
we know that there's a little resistance at the rec center, but I don't know that it's insurmountable. If it was the prime candidate, I think we could probably make that work, but I think we felt like all three were pretty good candidates, so
I'm all
let's pick one
for
without resistance.
piloting here.
Yeah,
Because every fall and every spring is another opportunity to plant native plants, so.
Yeah, no, I
we'll
think it's
have lots
great.
of-
I just have one other question, though. So they're gonna put a pumping station there?
Yes, they
That's a-
purchased that for a lift station.
So in the grand scheme of things, lift stations are ugly. It's gonna sit on Marquee Street as you come through. I think we should do the pilot and then landscape that whole thing around the pump station so nobody can see it.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, I can't believe they put a pump station in the middle of, on a marquee location. They're ugly. And they don't even, and like I have one over by me on 27, 28, they don't do anything to like
Very
make them
large.
aesthetically pleasing. In fact, some of the pipes, because I've been looking at all this stuff when I was running, a lot of the pipes are rusted. I mean, this would be a nice pilot, but I would say, yeah, let's do it so you can't see the pump
Well,
station, just give them access.
the ones on Ocean Boulevard look like big stockades, they're just huge.
All behind a
walls
privacy
of-
fence
of
generally.
wood, like a fence.
Yeah, and if they're gonna do that here, that helps, but it would be
Yeah.
nice, we do the pilot, I agree, I think, we're gonna talk about the glass, recycled glass project, I think pilots are a great way to do things, because it's successful,
We
people
could
can
try
see
it
it,
and
they
see
can touch
how
it,
it
they can
goes.
taste it. And if
Seems
it's
like-
successful, then we can build support through the city council for becoming sort of a program or an initiative, so I agree with everybody.
Excuse me.
No, I'm
Yeah,
done.
I'm agreeing with you too, not cutting you off.
No, no, no.
It seems to me, before we can draw up plans and move forward, which is something I think we all want to do on this committee, we need to find out from the Water and Sewer Commission where that pump station's going to be located, because I think there's value in what Douglas suggested, to maybe work a garden around that. So I don't.
I'll give,
One
I'll
of
follow
their
up with Chris
options
Shorten.
they mentioned was not even putting one there. you
Yeah, I'll
know?
talk, I'll
That's
take
what
the
they
action.
told-
So
They told
I
Park
think we
that.
need to find
So
out
the-
what their time schedule and site plans are.
Yeah, I think your point is very key there, that their horizon for doing anything here is much farther out than what I think they're saying, use it for 2 years. We can
I see.
reevaluate after 2 years because we won't be anywhere close to using it in that time period.
Yeah,
Could be
I'll follow
that-
up with Chris.
Yeah, which is a bit disappointing, because listening to what Charlene's suggesting in design methods, we would be looking at renewable plants in a lot of cases which the pump station could interfere with.
So I guess my advice would be, if the committee feels like permanence is important, then I think we pivot away from this site. Because we don't own it, we don't control it, it has future, kind of uses. From my perspective, I thought that this was gonna be kind of a educational, we were gonna do a series of classes, have this pilot and kind of exhibit. But I'm guessing that 2, 3, 4 years from now, the interest will have either taken off and we could do something more permanent, or it will have served its educational purpose, and at that point, we could ratchet back maintenance.
If you were to ask me with a blank slate, where would I start if the purpose is to showcase what native plants can do for the community, and we want to have classes maybe hosted at the rec center, then you should do it at the rec center, right? Someplace on that
Yeah, I
property.
think we've talked about that. And I personally would be interested in seeing what suggestions could be made for the Carmen Bunch site as a pilot. Because if we can create a garden and maintain it, and it will come back every year in certain respects, then we don't have to dig it up and move it, or we don't have an unsightly pump station to interfere with the beauty of it. So, I mean, we're talking about, I think, what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we're talking about doing a test site, a pilot program. And I'm suggesting it would be great to do that test site where it's visible and where it can be self-sustaining to some extent.
What's that little section right there on the corner coming off the connector? There's a garden there.
That's a garden club does it, I think, right when you come off
Right
the
here?
connector onto the island.
On the
Yeah.
right, that is,
Couldn't that be converted? I mean, that's,
Well,
we
while
couldn't
we-
have a more natural, I mean,
While we have Charlene here, I'd love, so what would be the pros and cons of this spot versus the park?
So I honestly think both could work.
Okay.
At one point, when we were touring the two sites, we're like, we could do both. And then we're realizing this is being maintained by volunteers.
Right.
And especially that first spring is a higher input time in terms of volunteer hours. So one thing that we were discussing then was this could be a year 1 project, and then the park site could be a year 2 project. And the benefit of doing both of those is it would be completely different plant species. So in this site, we can use much larger scale plants like the spotted bee balm and the dune sunflower and the blanket flower. Those kind of need room to do their thing. In the park setting, I would choose something that would be more small, suburban, yard friendly.
yeah.
So plants that are compact, that don't get as tall, that are less likely to flop. So I think honestly, sequentially, doing both of those sites would be really helpful. In terms of the rec center, if that is the location of where talks are taking place, it is always very helpful during, before, or after a talk to walk out to a site and say,
Yeah.
here is this plant.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And then here is how we maintain this. And it could just be going back and forth between a classroom and an outdoor classroom of show and tell and hands-on and that sort of thing.
Right, and the foot traffic is exponentially higher at the rec than.
That's the
these
hub.
other-
The,
Of the
the one nice thing about this, though, is that does look like, it could use some prettying up, that particular
Yeah, right
site.
now, it's a wasteland.
Yeah.
It's
And-
like
and
it could
have a-
be for
have
2
a lot more
years.
habitat.
And if it's for 2
And if
years,
they not want the
you
property,
you
we could give
pretty
it
it up,
back.
and people,
Yeah.
and we see what people say. They may notice and say, wow, that's a beautiful little garden that they put it on the 7th Avenue, and we promote it, and then we, like you said, we do several different initiatives.
Mm-hmm.
But, so either one of them I'm good with, but I think this one definitely could use some
It sure
prettying
could.
up.
I want to get in the record a reminder that the park site is also right where we have our Fisher recycling cans at the moment and the compost cans. So those of us that are environmentally inclined and use those sites might be willing to walk over and pluck some weeds. I guess, Charlene, another question I have is, I don't really have a good idea what the scale of this site is. Is that like 10 feet across or something?
So it's basically dependent on the budget.
Okay, yeah, well,
And I didn't
that
wanna-
comes to my question. I love to talk about budgets. Is there a possibility of doing one at each site on a smaller demo?
So I think
Scale.
in 1 year, just because of the volunteer maintenance, having people go to 2 different sites to get that startup phase going might be much to ask.
Okay.
So what would you, putting price aside for right this second, and knowing we're not doing the whole site, what would you recommend as a large enough area to work with? But, and large enough maybe to give it that lot some aesthetic value, but realizing that it might be short-term? Do you have a recommendation on size?
So in terms of the most costly portion of it will be the sod removal. And so that, it depends on how many volunteers we have, but in order to have a visual impact, especially for people who are viewing it from their car, I think you would at least want a 20 by 20. It would be easy to scale up from there, just because all of these plants get to be a pretty good size pretty easily. And the plants, the herbaceous plants are not costly. The shrubs are more,
20 by 20, it's not that big. Do you know, like, without holding you accountable to it, do you have a budgetary number per square foot or something that you
so
do?
not per square foot, because like shrubs, it's $55 for a plant. For a dune sunflower, which will occupy more space than a shrub, it's $9. For a blanket flower, which will occupy about the same amount of space as a shrub, is $3. So it's more that startup, getting the site ready. And then if we did a small number of shrubs as a demonstration sort of thing, we could do any size area with the annual wildflowers and some of the less expensive perennials, especially the mint family ones, because they will occupy space.
So it would seem to me to get locked in or closer to a price, we'd want to say, okay, 20 by 20 sounds good. Could you work up a proposal, right? Something
Yes.
along that line. That's what we've done with the other programs. We've kind of set some parameters and then asked for a proposal. So in terms of the square footage, that's 400 square feet. I mean, what do you all think about that size? mean,
I think we're ready for a proposal. Certainly Charlene comes highly recommended before. And I don't want to cut you off of any of your information. I just want to give our next presenter a little bit of time.
So maybe a 10 by 10 or a 20 by 20 and get an estimate of 2 alternatives? Is a 10 by 10 too small?
I would say to get a diversity of plants for a demonstration garden, we would want something larger than a 10 by 10.
So
So a
do we need
20
a
by
motion
10.
for something like this, or we just ask Charlene?
No, I think you can just, I think there's consensus that you would want a proposal for
So-
20 by 20, 400 square feet, kind of the most impactful, I guess I would say the sky is not the limit on budget, but make it.
Economical
Yeah.
But
plans.
economically, and also recognizing it's
But
volunteers.
impactful. Doesn't need to all be
We probably want something that's
$9
medium
plans.
level of maintenance. We don't want something that needs somebody out there every day.
Yes, I'm a big fan of low maintenance.
Yeah, low
High
maintenance.
sustainability gardens.
High diversity and color. So if you could provide us a proposal maybe and,
So just, and I think if that sounds agreeable, that would be great from our perspective. And I don't know, I mean, I guess I'm hearing, and maybe we've talked about this already and I didn't retain it, but is the expectation that volunteer labor that she would just be giving us a proposal on kind of advice and plant material, or are we expecting
I would say.
volunteers to do all of the labor? And I guess that would need to work into your,
Do you have a
You'd
crew,
need to know
Charlene?
that.
Do
So
you have your own
typically,
crew if you do it?
I am my crew.
Okay.
For larger projects, which I don't consider this a large project, I have a landscaping company that has a crew of 8 people that I sometimes work with. But this is easily on the scale of something that I would do by myself even without volunteer effort.
Okay.
And in
So-
terms of
What do you
the
think, Mary?
project,
Volunteer?
Mary volunteers for everything.
Yeah, I have a couple of people that want to help, and Jonathan just gave me a number of somebody else that he knows that wants to help.
I'd come out and help.
Yeah, I think all of us would
Rayanne on
and could
Sullivan's
mobilize
Island,
people, and there's a
she's
garden
gonna
club,
help.
right? So-
No, they just-
Yeah, well, so let's do it, Douglas, to your
so
question.
count on some volunteers.
Yeah.
so what I'll
We'll
plan.
figure that out if we can get
Everybody's
plans
anxious
and
when you
agree
put it together.
on
Yeah.
the
When
site.
it comes the
and
day to show up in your work
plantings.
boots.
Would it be asking too much for you to, it is asking a lot, I know it is, to draft a proposal for each site?
I could do that.
the park as well as the triangle.
Yeah, not a problem.
Thank you.
And so, just for like expectations, so I do charge for design. So as long as that's okay, I'm very affordable at this stage. I've been doing it for a couple of years now, but I'm still
So will we need a design to do the estimate?
So the design comes first, then the
Yeah,
estimate based
yeah.
on the design.
Okay, so then, if
Yeah,
there's
so
money
that's
involved-
spending money. We don't have authority to spend money.
That's it.
Administrator.
I think we can work that out. Let-
Okay.
Let the two of us exchange an email about expectation of design. It sounds like it's that we can work that out, price-wise.
And one selfish question, I'm not selfish, but do you work with individual homes? Like if someone wanted to take their house and say, I want to take my backyard and convert it over, you work with them?
So that is one of the services I offer
Do you
through
have any
Native
cards?
Plants to the people.
Leave a couple of your cards here.
Oh, I should have brought cards. I did not
Yeah,
bring cards,
pass them
but
out.
I have my email on the next slide,
Great.
I think.
Okay.
And
Let's
Charlene,
move-
and I think we already have this, and maybe I have it through emails with Mary. There is also a cost for hosting a series of classes that you have, and you can include that in your proposal as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Whatever number, I mean, do you generally think a few sessions? Were we expecting?
Yeah, I think more than two would be expecting too much of the populace. I think a lot of people will show up for the first one,
For one or two?
one or two. Yeah.
So maybe let's proposal for two.
Okay. And these are topics, so generally, I always encourage the introductory one, which is the gardening for wildlife with native plants. So I showed you.
I think that would be interesting, so that'd be great.
The first few slides today came from that talk. And then I'm also putting together one for butterfly gardening with native plants, introduction to our native bees, because often people only think about honeybees, which are not native, as well as bumblebees, and there's so many awesome native bees, which I think when you have native plants, they visit your yard, you become more aware, and so that extra education will be helpful.
I never saw a leafcutter bee before. I didn't know what it was. I was like, why have all these holes in my leaves?
Those are one of my favorites.
Yes, they're great.
And they fly around with all the pollen on the underside of their abdomen, so they're very distinctive. And I've actually seen them cut the little circular piece of a leaf,
Oh, cool.
which they then make into a very aerodynamic package. They fly it into a stem or some other site, and they
Or a
provision their
fence
egg with
post.
pollen and nectar. It's a pretty amazing process. So there's a lot of interesting facts to share about bees. I get excited about all this stuff. And then underappreciated pollinators. So there's a whole bunch of other things besides the butterflies and bees that I like to share. So I could definitely do the first one, and then whichever one of the other three you thought would appeal to the most people.
That would be great.
What would you think about the ordering of, I mean, do you do the talks to get people hyped up to then go be volunteer? And you kind of talk, I mean, that would be part of the design, and the future project would be part of the talks? And then
So-
after the talks conclude, shortly on the heels of that, we would actually do the demonstration area? Is that how it would flow, you think?
So we were talking in terms of timeline, potentially February for the talks and March for the planting.
Okay,
And so February would also overlap with some of the site
That's a good
preparation time.
okay.
So
That's a
that
good
would
time
be
for us.
perfect for recruiting some additional volunteers. And I could definitely include a little kind of add-on to the introductory talk of, here is a garden we're planning on implementing on your island next month. And if you would like to get involved, contact this person for coordinating. And I'm happy to be on the ground, coordinate the volunteer work days, especially the first few, help get people ramped up, just familiar with what plants to keep, what the common weeds look like. One of the services that I provide is actually an inventory of all the plants in a homeowner's yard, and helping them to identify plants that they might have considered weeds that are actually larval host plants for butterflies that they love.
That's a good idea.
And also things that I do recommend pulling and why. So there's various things that I can offer year 1, year 2, year 3, however was helpful.
That's wonderful and very comprehensive. Thank you, and we'll be hearing lots more from you and about you, I'm sure. I wanted to, before we move on, I wanted to see if Mary wanted to add anything. I know you were with Charlene
Yeah.
most of the day.
No, she covered it beautifully.
Okay.
And this is helpful information that we got today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
So
Thank you,
great,
Charlene.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, What a great start for a meeting. Now, we're going to follow that wonderful talk about plants and native species and stuff and talk about some trash. Not really. We're talking specifically about glass. And we've been involved with Fisher Glass Recycling's program, I think, for about a year now. You've got a contract coming up, is that right? Or, okay, so we're looking forward to hearing your report.
A little background for the last year. On the average, we're taking 1,052 pounds a week off the island from the two stops, which comes to 27 tons of mixed glass.
Wow.
That's a lot of glass off the island.
How does that compare to other places? I mean, that is a,
It's a ton.
It's a lot of glass. I mean,
27 tons.
imagine a tractor trailer going down the road. That holds 24 tons.
okay.
So it's-
Wow.
So we're doing a little over a tractor trailer a year.
Yeah. And the way I'd like to improve on this is to add some bins, some more bins to each stop. Because when we're going, they're full. So
Okay,
it's working, we need to make it better, and on my end, we need to improve on the education. Every rental company needs to know where the glass goes, why it should go, and every guest that comes on this island needs to understand or have the outlet to use the bins. And it tells the story that Isle of Palms is moving in a very, very positive green direction. And the people, most of the people that rent these houses or come here on vacation expect the glass to be recycled.
Right.
And they need to have the story. And I want to work a little bit closer with the marketing and your social media end of the office and get things and really promote the whole green aspect in what you're doing and make a really good story for the island. So to try to improve it, we can, in a couple steps, add the bins as number one. And we can bring those out next week.
do we need any more locations added?
We would like that too. If we could have anything on this side of the island, would be great. The Harris Teeter does really well and the marina does well.
What do we
And so
have?
you're
Breach
pointing
in
at the
the
breach
parking lot.
inlet side.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Anything in that direction would be great.
How are the folks at the, Carroll Realty, do we go play?
When does your contract expire? Please
It has.
remind me. It
Yes,
has.
ma'am.
Okay, so we probably want to not think about this for too long before we make a recommendation.
Have you worked up the numbers for adding new
Yes,
bins?
ma'am, we have the. send the
Yeah,
proposal
it's
out.
in your packet.
Okay, I didn't miss that.
It's the exact same from last year. We didn't do any price increase on it.
Does that mean you're not picking up now because it's expired?
Everything was picked up today.
Oh, good, because I went yesterday and I had a big
Goodwill.
bag
Yeah.
and everything was overflowing and there was a pile on the ground and I didn't know whether to leave my bag there.
We got it
Make
all
it
right from
easier.
there. Yes, ma'am, we got it all today.
I'm so glad you're adding bins because we need them.
We do.
Yeah.
I'm glad to see it's been working so well.
It has been working well. And it's just, I think if we can do a blanket-wide education for all the residents also, just to tell, a positive story. People need something positive about recycling, because it's been bastardized for years. And the Island Palms and all the residents need something good and positive, to go out and tell everybody else what's going on and the good things you're doing. Yes, sir.
Is there anything that we need to educate the public on that they're doing incorrectly at the site? Have you seen any problems with the glass that's getting put in
The
the bins?
contamination level has been so minimal, maybe 2 to 3%. So the contamination is not an issue.
Okay.
So it's been
Is
very
that,
good.
is that what you mean, is that the residual in the bottles? What do you mean by contamination?
Plastic bags are the
Oh,
biggest
gotcha,
contaminant.
okay.
Dog waste, animal
Oh.
waste, people will walk by and put their bags in it, things like that. But it's been so minimal,
Okay.
which is good to see.
Yeah, great. So that's a
And-
positive report. And again, I want to add to the education thing, and maybe we talk to, is it Chandra? That's
Yep,
our
Chandra.
social media PR person now. Because I know, I didn't realize, and I think I'm pretty informed, and I know from talking to other residents, we didn't realize that the county doesn't recycle glass. I think that's a big selling point for what we're doing here, that you can put it in your recycling bin, they'll take it, but they don't recycle it. And that last step in turning it into beautiful countertops and stones and trivets, I think is very effective. And I'd like to get our residents more aware.
The county collects it. I don't want to say anything bad about it. The processor that brings the material into the county facility gets paid by the ton to have it come in.
Oh, so glass
He
helps
loves
the,
the weight, so he has no incentive to remove that glass. It goes off the end of the line, and it is so contaminated, it goes as landfill cover every day.
Yeah, they crush it in landfill.
So would they, so just, and I think that we've been delicate about hammering that point because I believe it's our impression that the county would say, well, we are repurposing it, we're reusing it, we are not, and I don't know, when you say they put it as landfill cover, that to me sounds like they're just putting it in the landfill, which is
It
this.
goes down, it's a road base, it compacts the existing waste. It's really good, they figured it out. It's a great compaction ratio on a landfill. So it gives you extended life on the landfill. And it's reuse of the glass is the way they're looking at
yeah.
it.
Well,
So-
like, again, I think making it a positive message, not trashing our county, but the step of what this glass is used for, not compacting road fill, but landfill, but, turning it into products that you guarantee 100% of the glass that you pick up is repurposed and recycled.
Yes, ma'am. What we don't use in our manufacturing goes to the largest glass processor in the world. And they process the glass to a certain point, and we have specialty glass we buy back from them. So it's a complete full circle of the glass.
Yeah.
That's good to
So we're
know.
paying you to pick it up and then you're buying it back from somebody else.
Well, when
There's specialty
makes
glass
sense somewhere. I know, yeah.
can't,
he's smiling, so it's, whatever's good.
That's
one thing's working
recycling,
for him,
that's
it's working, so-
recycling.
So,
So I was looking at the proposal and it says $9,600 one time per week at 2 locations. But the proposal is, how would it change if we're adding bins or adding another site?
Adding bins is not a problem. We need the bins.
Okay.
That should be done next week. There's no extra charge on that. And it depends on the location. We need to look at that.
so it's really just the number of times, if I remember this from last year, it's the number of times you pick up.
Yes, sir.
Not how many bins you have per se.
Exactly.
What was that other site we talked about? It was up here by Front Beach.
We talked
Where the
about, so we
restaurants
have
are.
2 large parking lots in the middle of the Front Beach area, but I think this group felt like, it was kind of off the beaten path and it was more of the tourist kind of center. There is a parking lot at Reach Emily. As a beach for nourishment kind of headquarters. That's the only place that jumps to mind that's kind of visible on Palm, on that end of the island, other than the big parking lots. I don't know, are you,
Put it in our parking lot. Why wouldn't put one in our, or put a
It seemed like
station
all
in
the
our parking
rentals are
lots.
right
So you think of people coming off with their coolers,
do you have a feeling on that, Chris? I mean, I guess it would only be 2 blocks away.
Yeah.
So it's not really a meaningfully different location, I
And
guess.
sometimes with the tourists, when they come to the park, we're not going to get the best results.
You're gonna get more trash if
We
they
will.
see.
Yeah, a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
plastic on the beach.
So you wouldn't
May I
recommend putting one in the
suggest
parking lot?
that,
Okay.
may I suggest that we move forward, however, we have ability to get Fisher under contract
Yep.
at this point. We recommend, I don't know if it's need a motion or not, but as a committee, it sounds
Yeah,
like
that's a recommendation.
we're recommending that the Fisher contract be renewed for
I'll make a
another
motion
year.
that we renew the Fisher, well, first let me say, we all agree that based on the numbers that Chris has provided, that the initial pilot program has been successful. We, as the Environmental Advisory Committee, support continuing it for another year. So we'd like to make a motion to move forward with rehiring Fisher to do it. In terms of the business, we were given a proposal, if we can turn that over to the city to make the, to ratify or whatever. And we also agree with the recommendation to add additional bins where it be. In terms of other locations, I say we move that to a separate discussion for right now, and just move.
And let Chris
Yeah.
check out possible other sites.
And
We
if
could
you
always
could have
amend
me
the
back,
contract.
if you could give me a list of 1 or 2 spots, I can do a site visit, take some pictures at the beach or nourishment area right there.
So it's right across Palm Boulevard from the boathouse. There's a public parking lot there.
It's not very big.
Yeah, it's pretty small. Currently, it's overwhelmed with sand and bulldozers and all that kind of stuff. generally that site could probably be a candidate.
And that could
That's
be-
the only, well, the Seventh Avenue Triangle, I don't know if, I mean, that's not
I
our
think
site, it's the water department. That might be
It'd be
too
like-
kind of visible for trash
Yeah,
cans.
it'd be like putting a building on the.
I
that's
have
the
a
only-
point of order. We have a motion
I'll
on the
second.
floor.
Yeah, so the motion is to extend the contract.
I'll second the motion.
Okay.
All in
And what-
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, now
And
we're
Chris and
official.
I will, let us exchange ideas about
About future
future
sites.
locations, but in the meantime,
Good.
add as many bins as, I think we did install a corral.
At the Harris Teeter, there is a corral, and it's open
Is it be-
next to the fire station near the marina.
Okay.
But as a,
Chris, is it possible that you
Point of
can
order,
send
how do we
us
get this
maybe quarterly, just a
appropriated?
report that says how much you
Absolutely,
took?
yes. Just,
That we-
we'll give you tonnage.
for,
Yeah, just if you can get us a report.
Yes,
then
that's
we
a
can-
good
we can-
metric
we
for
can
us
track
to-
it,
it's not,
So we
it's
can
not
see
really
them,
approved until
if
council.
you can do that, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I
Any
think, I
que-
think,
Melvin's been up to see the manufacturing. We have a whole, I'd love to invite you guys up to see our whole operation. If you want to have your meeting, well, I guess we can't because of the cameras, but you're more than welcome to come see our whole process.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'll
From
take you up on that.
beginning
It's
to end, and
Very
put your
impressive.
hands on it and see.
Where are you located?
Yeah, it's fun.
Where's that?
Where is it?
We're on Industrial, right off of Leeds and Cosgrove.
I'd put it on the.
Yeah, just around the corner.
Everything, Chelsea.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay, are there any other questions for either Chris or Charlene? We can let them go. if-
Well, I'll have the cans on the truck for next week, so we'll go ahead and just get them in place
Great.
and then we'll start working on the education with all the rental companies coming up in the spring.
And our administration will work quickly to try to get the
yes,
official
don't stop what
contracts.
you're
signed.
doing, but there is a process. This is an advisory group. The proposal will go to city council for their consideration, but continue doing what you're doing, and we'll get a definitive read from council in the very near future. And I'll let you know. As I know the time that they consider it, I'll let you know that.
Okay, and if you need me to come back for council, I'm happy to.
Yep.
That's
Okay,
great.
thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you. This is something that I think has been really valuable for our committee.
May I grab
And,
my-
yes,
but-
well, I had my eye on
Feel
this,
free to, yeah,
but,
feel free to do that, we'll raffle it off to the team.
okay. Take it
Thank
away.
you for coming.
Thank you, Charlene. Thank
We
you,
love what you
Chris.
do and appreciate it.
I know.
So,
Wonderful work.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you, you too.
Chair,
Appreciate it.
question to the chair. How do we want to proceed with the agenda? We're over time on some of these items.
We don't, we can skip wildlife,
Well,
discussion of native plants, we've already done that.
I would like to continue if we can have a few more minutes, because we've got some things from our last meetings that need to be followed up on. And I think if anybody wants to make a brief report, otherwise, under old business, that's great. Mary, do you have anything to add for wildlife and native plants? I think
No.
that was pretty thorough.
Yeah, we beat
Okay,
that one.
one of the follow-ups on the litter was the butt canisters, and I guess it was an email from Sandy Brotherton that Robert had managed to empty most of them, except one that needed another
Right, yeah, we're,
adjustment, but is that going to be something we can move forward with?
yes.
Will
yeah, I
Robert
think-
continue
I
to
think
do it?
Robert has now folded it into their operations.
That's great.
Pretty decently, and they're comfortable with it. I know they're pinched in the summer. I think I think he feels like he can manage it this upcoming summer, but that's clearly when they're kind of stretched with
Right.
manpower, and that's when it's challenged. The winter for them is
So we can
They're
defer
able-
this discussion maybe until first part of next year.
Yeah, I think so.
To anticipate the volume
yeah,
increase.
I think so.
Excellent.
Oh, I just wanted to
Liv-
add, because I was told I was going to follow up on my outreach at school
Right.
for this. Well, now that you're saying it's something for the summer, I think that would be important. I've drafted a proposal to my school. I've had it sent out throughout grade levels. The only thing that I have to do now is to just get somebody to actually read the announcement on the loudspeaker. But all grade levels are aware. I do think moving forward, if this is something that needs more attention, coming up with a date or like a specific like day each week or bi-week or every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks that we could officially say is when we need people to help is probably the one thing that I need the most for this project.
Jordan, was your proposal for specifically the butt canisters, or might the student population volunteers be tapped for the garden as well?
I only mentioned stuff about like the litter cleanup, but if it needed to be expanded into the garden, I'm sure it could.
Okay.
Why don't we see how it goes with
Yeah.
the seminar, and we've got about 5 people already.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
Do
Hold
you,
off on that.
Jordan, do you think is summer a problem? Or
I-
is summer almost better because they have more time? What's your opinion on
I would
summer
say-
versus?
So once the summer starts, the new round of community service hours begins. So, and I
At the
think,
beginning of that summer?
so it's like as soon as you get out of school, like it already kind of starts that new school year. I won't be there next year to administer that, but if I got it started now and kind of got the message out there about like if people wanted to do it next summer, because people
You could get it
will be
kinda
more
set up.
available to do it because they won't have school and stuff like that. But yeah, I would say the summer is probably.
Summer's a good time. And that, I
Yeah.
mean, we have
That'd
a
be great.
definite date when, and it's when we go to twice a week trash pickup. I mean, that is kind of officially when they are out
that would
of
be
spare
helpful.
time. So we could pin down kind of exact dates.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
That's super. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Douglas and John and Ellen, I don't know if you're on water or not, but do you have any?
Yeah, I can give a
You've
quick
got a
summary.
couple of things
So
to-
so I took the sewer maps, took the drainage maps, identified 13 outfalls for stormwater across the island, not including wild dunes are out there. And then I contacted GEL Laboratories in Trident and asked them for itemized costs on analysis. If you look at the GEL, I like the GEL because they actually included to be able to do the sampling if we wanted them to. So you'll see that the total cost on this is $10,995, but that includes $1,548, second line up from the bottom, for them to do the work. And it also includes $5,850 for PFAS. So if we go back to what we talked about last meeting, if we don't do PFAS and we do the sampling ourselves, this would be about, for that many samples, it's about just under $4,000. If we ask them to do the sampling and we don't include PFAS, that takes us to about $5,100. And if we want to include PFAS, now this is all 13 outfalls for PFAS. What we could do is just do maybe 2 or 3 random samples just from a couple of the samples and reduce that. So,
Would GEL then analyze the samples?
oh yeah, they'll
So
collect the
they're still
samples.
in the,
Yeah, if we
Loop.
pay the $1,548, what they'll do is they'll come out here during a rain event, and I told them I'd volunteer and help them. And basically, during the rain event, they would move from the first outfall to the 13th outfall and take these,
from each one?
collect the samples for these parameters, analyze them, and provide us a report back with the results for all the outfalls.
Well,
So that's per event, correct? That's.
One-
so it'd be
one event.
$11,000 for one testing.
One testing event, if we go with PFAS, right? PFAS is the big number there. If you take the PFAS
Yeah,
out, it's only
goes to half
51,
that.
and we have them do the sampling, it's only $5,100, $5,145.
I think one thing to consider too, I don't remember who suggested it, but instead of doing 13 tests for PFAS, you could ask them to pool all 13 samples just for that one PFAS
Yeah.
test. So instead of 5,800, it'd be the $450 for the one test and see.
Yeah.
And if there is a problem, then you can aliquot it back out and say, okay, there was a problem. Which
Then
one
you
was
get-
the problem? That would save you some money. That's another way.
Yeah, I
think
don't think
to
for
do it.
PFAS, we need to do all 13. I agree with John, we either come up with a way of compositing across all of them, just to see if we have it showing up, or we pick we do like a random number generator, and just out of the 13, we pick maybe 2 or 3. But I think 1 or 2 PFAS samples is probably enough to do. And if you added PFAS in, so that brings us up to about $6,000 if we ask them to do the sampling and the analysis. Now, there's a couple of parameters in here that when I was talking with GEL that they don't do for stormwater much anymore. So this could go down a little bit more. If we take out like oil and grease, and BOD5 are 2 that they typically don't do for stormwater anymore. So it could go down even a little bit more.
Douglas, you're the expert. what is your recommendation
I would
after all your research?
Yeah, I would recommend we go through with the sampling. We eliminate the extra parameters that, you know, that the industry no longer considers really necessary for stormwater, so the BOD5 and the oil and grease. And I think based on Jonathan's recommendation, we come up with a way of being able to do some sort of composite or maybe one or two indicators on whether or not we have PFAS leaving in the stormwater.
Will we need to, I suppose, get a proposal from GEL?
I have a full proposal. I didn't print out the contract. This is their proposal, but there's a 6-page contract. So what I can do as an action item is I will have them tighten this up to one PFAS sample, per Jonathan's suggestion, take off the BOD, the oil and grease, and have them repropose it. And Douglas, I can send it to you.
Is there, I'm sorry, I don't know all the abbreviations, but fecal contaminants, is that still on their proposal?
Let's see.
I was looking at Trident, I see
No.
FC. I don't know if FC
No,
means
you're-
fecal
Yeah,
contaminant
you're
or
right.
not.
There's the total coliform and fecal coliform are missing. They don't do those analysis. So what we'll probably do is we'll collect the samples and then run them over to, we'll have to run them to Trident for.
What is the urgency of, I know it's really important, but can we bring it up again at the next meeting, or is this something we need to
I was
act
gonna
on
s-
before then?
I was gonna say, we don't need to make a decision right now, you know, the way the weather is and all that. I think this gives us an idea of what it looks like. If we wanna just sit on it, I can update the proposal, get it out to everybody, and we
Yeah.
can make a vote, we can make a decision on it
I
next
think
meeting.
that's a good
If-
idea,
if-
especially since both of you have come up with some ideas for
The other thing too is I didn't have a chance.
less money.
I think I want to go out too and physically see all the outfalls and take a look at them all, just to make sure they're, you know, all viable for sampling. So I'll probably take a ride, maybe take a picture of each one of them, because they're going to want us to identify exactly where we have to sample.
That'd be great. That'd be great.
Do you, is kind of one test useful? And I feel like we had situations where we got a test, something was super high. But like, well, was that an anomaly? Is that
Or
Do you feel
the other
like-
way, it could be super low.
Well, if we
Could
go
be
back to
a
what we
lot.
talked about, the idea was we do a round of sampling across all the outfalls, and based on the results, we look to see if we want to do more sampling. So we probably said this would be a phase 1. Phase 2 would be, some may be high, some may be low. You know, when you look at where on the maps, where there's a lot of septic versus not a lot. So we do it, and then we should be able to see whether we've got a pattern across the whole island, which might be more like, for instance, on the coliforms, if we see all those high coliform numbers, it could be because of the animals. But,
And then, we've already done, don't we already know the coliform numbers are off the charts?
yeah, they're over the detection limits. They're really, really high.
And I think part of it, and maybe asking some GEL or Trident their expert opinion on the frequency of testing, because if you get one data point, you got one data point. Like, you don't know a trend. So does that, and if you're trying to really find a problem, is the best time to sample after there's been a long period of no rain, like it feels like we haven't had much rain, and then all of a sudden there's rain, and might be really concentrated.
Yeah,
That would be the highest it would ever be. Well, if you get that sample and there's nothing high during the time you think would be the highest, well, then you don't have a problem. I mean, I don't know. This is just my conjecture. I'm not an expert.
I did discuss that with them, and they actually do have a stormwater practice lead.
Yeah.
So what I'll do then is between now and the next meeting, I'll get with the practice lead again, and I'll share what I hear from him. There's a couple of different ways you can look at it. When you're doing it for permits, you have to take a composite sample in the first 30 minutes, because they want worst case, which is what we call first flush. Because normally what will happen is on the initial rainfall, all the really bad stuff that's been sitting out there is just gonna wash out. Typically, you get it in the first 30 minutes. So what they normally do is they put out these automated samplers that take an aliquot every 2 minutes
Okay.
and that's gonna get very expensive to start with something like that. So the idea behind this was to do broad across the island with a grab sample when the water's flowing through, to see what we have going off the island, and then based on the results, determine whether we're seeing the same thing we've been seeing, and then we decide if we want to put in, like you had to talk about, the mats that they have available for reducing coliform or whatever.
Yeah, I think you just want good quality data, because we just get data and it's no good, and then we've not done ourselves any
Well,
service.
when you talk about quality data and environmental sampling, it's getting the water, making sure that you meet the holding times, and you get the proper analysis by a certified lab. The results, in terms of what you get from the results, that's, with stormwater, it is tricky because, you get the end of the storm versus the beginning of the storm. But if you think about it, we're really a residential island. We're not, it's like an industrial site where you're going to expect to find other types of pollutants or contaminants. But we
It
can talk
would-
more, Jonathan.
It would be nice to know, so fecal chloroform is on our suspect list. We're obviously very concerned about PFAS. Nitrogen is, I think, a good thing to be measuring when you have a lot of gardening supplies on an island. But getting something longitudinal, getting, over time, multiple data points, maybe in a focused way, is something that's jumped out to me as interesting. Like, if we want to have more than, I guess, 1 or 2 data points for fecal chloroform, for example, like saying that we'll choose a couple of test sites and disperse it out over a longer period of time. In your mind, is that what would be in phase 2?
Yeah.
For phase 1, we kind of just get
Yeah,
a big, this is our opening, this will
It's a
tell
base-
us
it's
a
a
baseline.
Yeah, so I think what we're gonna find is that we probably, the TSS, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the TOC, that's total organic carbon, are gonna vary, and they may or may not be at limits that we're concerned about, but total coliform, fecal coliform are probably gonna be the things we see.
Right.
So the question is, would we see any kind of range of variability across different parts of the island?
That would be very
Because
helpful,
then we can
actually.
look at where outfalls are, where we have a predominant amount of septic systems versus a non. And then from there, then we would go out and probably do that sampling where we would pay the extra money maybe to have a composite sampler out there and to actually take aliquots of the whole stormwater event.
Okay, I follow. Yeah, because, we're talking about 1 data point being not great, but if it's 1 data point across the 13 different outfalls, that gives us an opening look
Correct.
at sort of where the problem
To-
is.
to Jonathan's
It will
point, I mean,
help with educating decision makers as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, to Jonathan's point, I mean, a one-time grab sample and something like this, is it, you're not gonna build a scientific study off it, but when we look at remediation, when you're looking at trying to understand whether there's an issue, starting with a grab sample and making sure you've got a decent distribution of the grab samples is useful, because then you can see if you have any spatial patterns and to determine whether you want to do more or not.
Great, yeah.
And, the idea was to keep this under, 10,000 was even high. We wanted to keep it down. So I think we're there in terms of the dollar amount that we're trying to target and recommend.
So from my perspective, in the budget is $15,000 for special projects of this group. Fisher's 10,000. I'm guessing that Charlene is 5,000. And not that this is a lot of money, but I mean, if I'm seeing 5,000 and it needs to be kind of, a program should be best practices or a handful of events, it's getting to be a significant amount. So it might be at a point where we either kind of develop a full bore program and we put it in next year's budget as an item, or, if it's kind of a one-time thing, we go explain it's over budget, but, it's gonna be useful for X, Y, and Z.
Okay, so here's my professional opinion on that. I'd rather do that. I'd rather put together a full program, maybe working with GEL or a consultant, and then put a proposal in front of the council and look at this.
To budget next year?
To budget next year, and then perhaps to create a water quality management program that becomes part of the annual budget going forward. I think that would be a more productive.
From my perspective, it seems a little kind of scattershot of we'll just get some information and we'll.
I
see what
feel
we
the
get
same.
and
So
that-
I've devised, we devised something here that is good for getting some information. But I think it would be good to have a water quality program in place. And if we wait, defer this and we write it up next year, make sure we get everybody's opinion. If we want to get any consultant, they'll always provide you free, to get a proposal out. They'll sit with us and talk to us. And then we put that out in front of.
John, may I ask you to bring back to the committee at the next meeting, if that's not pushing you too much, a refined proposal from GEL based on our most important, I guess, things to test for. I think there's a benefit of making a presentation to council, especially since PFAS have been getting so much national publicity, and separately propose a full program. So
Sure.
we can get the first, recommend, if it suits us, the first testing possibility, and then looking at what we would do to follow up.
Yeah, I mean, so the
And
other.
maybe you could base the long-term program on what you see in
Well,
that.
and that's kind of the way this was
First.
designed. That's kind of the way this was, is first, let's look at this. But I think it's important to lay that out, lay it out, even if it's a little diagram that says we're gonna do this. And if it goes this way, we're gonna do this, if it goes this way. Because I think just to ask for a program without any justification is hard. So the whole idea of this was to see if we have any issues that would then give us justification and basis for
build a
asking the
program.
council to put together
Yeah.
Put into their budget.
a budget item.
Okay.
I
That
think
sounds-
that's the thought I had here.
That
So I'll
sounds
tighten this up.
a
I'll
good
talk with the
plan.
folks at GEL, and then I'll come back and I'll write it up in just a bulleted document that we can then put on the record. And you want to take it back to, John,
Yeah.
you could take it back to the council and what we want to do. And I think that's the best way to do it.
Okay,
I mean,
that sounds
typically,
good.
I mean, just if you look at the cost side of things, if we're trying to narrow it down, why are we really testing for phosphorus and nitrogen? I mean, mostly that's for farm runoff and that type of stuff, and we're a barrier island with very little.
You don't think anybody's putting fertilizers on
Yeah,
their
I'm
property?
sure they are, but are they to a point where they're, I mean,
Well,
it's
it's
typically for
that-
large farm runoff, right?
I mean, that's what, I mean, that's kind of what you do. You look at it, and if we see it, you know, we could then put something in place, some sort of fertilizer recommendations, or I mean, yes, this is a small municipality, but if you also look at the cost, it's not $35 and $30.
Okay.
Well.
What else, John?
Excuse me.
It's $1,500.
Yeah, when you,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Belvin, yeah.
excuse me, Bevel's on a tight time, and
Just
he's
concerned
already
about the pharmacy closing
over,
at
and
5:30.
he, and we can come back to this if we need to,
For
but,
Belvin's benefit, before he leaves, the city has entered into an agreement with a design-build team for this building.
Mhm.
Part of their first phase is kind of giving council different alternatives for this facility. And they are going to build into that kind of analysis some energy efficiencies, some basic kind of environmental controls that they were all about it. They were very excited about it. They said, you know, we know kind of right off the rip a really good bang for the buck type improvements that we could suggest. There are others that that you could do. We kind of explained we wanted it to be a little bit of sending a signal. They said, we know that tier of improvements. So they were very on board and all about it. And
That's
that's
good.
getting rolled into that project.
someone also suggested, I think it's Susan Smith, that we look at the Public Works building also, in terms of perhaps solar panels or environmental
Yeah.
upgrades. I know it's not the same schedule.
Yeah,
but-
we explained that exactly, and they kind of said the analysis will basically be the same. It'll be the same return, the same cost per unit.
Okay.
And so they said they would bring us all up to speed and
Okay, that's
give us those
forthcoming. then.
considerations.
so are they
One of
considering
the
LEED
things that-
certification?
Yeah, they are.
Are they
Excuse
gonna-
me.
are they-
Excuse me. He's got to go. Important.
Yeah,
But-
well-
But he was going to report on EVs and,
Yeah, I checked in with Katie McCain with Save Charleston on what they're doing for their fleet transition. And she said that a transition plan for IOP would probably be pretty straightforward because we don't have a huge fleet. You can hire consultants to do it, and the price tag that she threw out is probably less than $25,000. Or staff can
for the analysis, not
for
for
the whole
conversion.
thing. Consultants for the whole conversion.
Consulting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or your staff can become experts and do it in-house by following other plans and the numerous resources and guides available for local governments online. She shared a link to energy.gov. They have a very detailed blueprint for fleet transitions, and I've been reading over it. And it basically says everything you need for a fleet transition, the timeline you would need. It's a pretty concrete guide. But the starting point is gathering fleet data and then performing analysis.
So, and I guess separate from this I guess I was focusing on City Hall and the renovations of City Hall, but kind of separately,
Yes.
we are pretty deep into the analysis of transitioning the fleet. And we're in contact with their Public Works Director, who's been overseeing, I guess, probably in tandem with Katie. but
Right.
We have, we're deep into their limitations in terms of the number of dumps they can do, and they had a trial. There were a lot of learning experiences from that trial.
Right.
They're starting their transition with a different brand so we are also looking pretty deeply at,
Somebody still
Public
needs
work.
to give me, I think I talked about it before, the benefit of an electric vehicle over.
Yeah, whether
Well,
we
you know-
even want to do that is
Yeah,
something
yeah.
that
Yeah, I mean,
will be
that's-
And I'm
that's
not
what
talking
comes-
about just energy, I'm talking about from a full
Life.
economic
Yeah,
carbon footprint.
I agree, because our fleet.
I'm still not convinced that it's the right solution
Yeah,
personally.
well, it
but-
seems to be that's a lot of the discussion
Well,
going
you
on
got-
in the public
you
now
got-
too.
Can I
90
comment on
seconds
that?
to get over
I would like to comment on that, is that I do agree with John. though.
Thank you
I
very
think, I think our fleet is relatively small, and I don't know how much energy savings and carbon dioxide savings, and I don't know if it's, from a zero-based budget standpoint, I don't know if it would be something you'd want to spend the money on.
Okay.
I'd rather see the buildings upgraded to more, or the water, or something with the I'd rather us get sewers.
Okay, well, that
That
sounds
fleet.
like something we're going to need more discussion
Absolutely.
and thought on. We've got a little bit of an update. If we can get out of here in the next couple of minutes, that'll be wonderful, but that depends on how fast Douglas can talk about sea level rise
Yeah.
adaptation.
And I'm
there are
going to leave this on the agenda, but I don't
Okay.
really have much to update, other than we have a consultant on board, they're doing it, they're going to set up stakeholder meetings and come to this group, but really no change since our last meeting on that one.
That's, thank you. And one suggestion that came in that we could touch on, maybe at another meeting since we're out of time, is the South Carolina Clean Marina Program, something that Susan Smith suggested. I don't know anything about it, but let's put it on the agenda
For
for
next month?
next month.
Can we also add to the agenda just a discussion about, about the committee and communications, direct communications or not with city council? And also, I think talking about, and this is something I picked up with during the elections, prioritizing. I know we have our different things we're doing, but I think sooner or later, we're gonna wind up with a big list of stuff, and we're gonna have to prioritize. And then tied to that also is, when we do have something, I think, part of the discussion is, how do we make a recommendation that then this is what we want to go specifically to the council? I think one of the things I heard when I was doing the election is, we don't hear enough on the environmental committee on city council. And they said, yeah, Douglas reports out, John reports out, but we'd love to hear directly from someone from the commission, from the committee, every once in a while. Now, I didn't hear that from everybody. I heard that from about 3 or 4.
Yeah, no other committee does that. But
Yeah,
we can
but they felt
talk
this,
about it.
the couple of people, and it could be just who they are, but they felt that the environment is pretty important on the island, and they want to hear more about it.
We'll put that on.
So it's part of a
Yeah.
discussion.
Okay, great, thank you. Is there any other urgent new business? I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
I
Motion to
move.
adjourn.
I second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
We don't have a quorum
See-
anymore.
Yeah, we do, yeah, we do. See y'all next month, thank you.